can also stream. All right. Again, thank you so much for being with us here today, despite everything that's going on. And we are very happy to welcome you. And yeah, I am Emily Molinari, and I work for the International Peace Bureau, which is an international organization based in Berlin. And we are having this event in the framework of the World Social Forum, which is taking place these days in Nepal. And for maybe the people that are not really familiar with these events, the World Social Forum serves as an open space and a platform for diverse range of participants, and its purpose is mostly to create reflective thinking, democratic debates, and to share ideas and experiences. And it started in 2001. And the vision of the World Social Forum is to have another world, and that's another world is possible. And for this year's edition, the motto is around the call of another world now. And that's why we are also very happy to have these events around the topic of common security, because we think that common security is something needed now, and is something that can change the world. And that's why also we named our events today Common Security as an Alternative to War and Confrontation. And maybe also a couple of words about IPB for the people that are not really familiar with us and our work. The International Peace Bureau, as said, is an international NGO. It's based in Germany, but we are active. We are a very big network. We are active in more than 70 countries, and we have more than 300 organizational members. And you can see more about our work from our website. We will share the links in the chat, so you can get familiar with our work if you're interested. And we have been involved since several years now, also with the work on common security. And just to mention maybe a couple of examples of the most recent work and collaboration we had. We published in 2022 a report, Common Security Report for our shared future, together with the International Trade Union Confederation and the Olof Palme International Center. We will share also this report in the chat with you. And we have also a long-standing collaboration with the Interparliamentary Union. We work with them also in the last years, and we are working on a toolkit for members of the parliamentarians in order to give them the tools and the resources to include common security also in their work. And also with the IPU, we published 2 videos for the Geneva Peace Week, for one 2 years ago, and the most recent one last year, also with the title Common Security, Bridging Divides and Restoring Trust. And you can watch these recordings, as said, on YouTube. We will share all the resources. And maybe the last news from our end is that we have been involved now in the Civil Society 7 process. We are the international coordinator for a working group. There are 7 working groups this year, and our working group is named Peace, Common Security, and Nuclear Disarmament. And this is also a sign that common security has been taking into account in the in also other international processes. And we are very glad and happy to be able to include our knowledge also in the C7 process. And we will write a report that will be presented to the G7 that is taking place in Italy in June this year. So this is just for give you a little overview of our work and what IPB has been doing about the concept of common security. But going back to us and today's event, I would like to Yeah, we were supposed to have 4 speakers. We have been a little unfortunate today. One of them is unwell, but we will hear his contribution, his speak anyway. And I know that the last speaker he will try to join us from Nepal. So there might be some internet issues there, but we will see. That's at a later point. Let's see if he can make it or not. But anyways, I would like to start with the presentations. The presentation will be more or less around 10 minutes. And then depending on how many presentation we can have today, we will have anyways at the end an open space for everybody to share their inputs, idea, and questions. So you can just type your questions in the chat or write them down or let me know if you want me to read them for you. So I think we can start with the first presentation. And I would like to start by presenting our first speaker, which is Sean Connor. And Sean is the Executive Director of the International Peace Bureau. And he has been working on the concept of common security in the last years for IPB. So he can give us a very good and general introduction to the concept. So I think, Sean, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I'm just pulling up my screen share real quick. So just give me 1 second here. All right, here we are. So yeah, thank you to everyone who's with us today. I will start with just a brief introduction of common security, past, present, and future. And I think the first point that we have to go into there is what is common security? Common security has a number of basic principles or understandings. It is a concept for the way that nations or states interact with one another. But it also goes beyond that to deal with really a redefining of what security means for people within a society. So the first basic understanding is that nations and populations can only feel safe when their counterparts feel safe, that we need to create a security that makes everyone feel secure rather than just one or another. This is also based in the fundamental principle that all nations have the right to security, and that military force is not a legitimate means for resolving the disputes between nations. In order to achieve this, common security necessarily includes the need for reductions and limits on the production of arms and sales of arms to create mutual security, and a basic need for cooperation rather than competition as the fundamental way that states relate to one another to resolve the global challenges of our times. I'll come back to those slides in just a minute, but first we'll go over to the history. In 1982, the Independent Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues, often referred to as the Palma Commission, publishes a report called Common Security, a Program for Disarmament. It's also known as a Blueprint for Survival, depending on where you find the text. This was one of 3 reports that came out during the 1980s, the others being Willy Brandt's North-South reports and Brundtland's Our Common Future report that sought to address the tensions and security concerns that were at the forefront during the Cold War, and to push for global cooperation to resolve these issues. These reports together were very influential in this time period where in the 1980s you had high levels of nuclear confrontation and high levels of military tension between the Eastern and Western blocs in the Cold War. And it led to, among other things, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF Treaty, in 1987. It was one of the important building blocks that would lead to that treaty, which reduced the number of nuclear weapons in Europe and reduced the tensions between the two sides, finding common ground. This Palma Commission as well included mostly high-level decision makers, politicians, representatives from the Eastern and Western blocs who came together to find ways to reduce those tensions in that time period. Of course, since the end of the Cold War, the world has changed quite a bit, whether it be the challenges to the system that dominated during the Cold War, this bipolar system of Eastern and Western central blocks confrontation. Following the Cold War, we had a brief period of quote unquote unilateralism with the US as the dominant force in the US and Western alliance. However, we've seen, especially in the past couple decades, much more of a move towards a multipolar world in which there are influential power centers in very different geographical areas, and this has led to escalating geopolitical tensions, challenges to the international rules-based order, and stagnant conflicts with no resolution, conflicts that have gone on sometimes for decades or beyond, and maybe have points of particular flare-up, but the conflicts are never truly solved. We've also seen climate change, global warming, and environmental degradation has become much more of a security concern in the past few decades, and the risk of pandemics, such as what we saw with COVID-19, which of course no borders and can travel freely across the borders, has contributed to a new understanding of insecurity. There's also increasing inequality across multiple levels in society, whether it be economic, social, gender, racial, or migration. And we see the rise of authoritarian regimes and shrinking democratic spaces, as well as an increasing reliance on militarization to solve the global problems that we're facing. Nuclear weapons are being proliferated. We've seen, of course, North Korea. There's concerns over Iran. While there's no confirmed possession of nuclear weapons at this point, there's, of course, concern there. And the continued proliferation, as well as in nuclear weapon states, the modernization, quote unquote, modernization of nuclear weapons, which these countries are spending billions of dollars to upgrade their nuclear capabilities. We've also seen new fields of militarization, whether it be in the cybersphere, whether it be in outer space, or new technologies from hypersonic missiles, artificial intelligence, unmanned aerial vehicles, also known as drones many times. And we've seen increasing military spending year after year, now at an all-time high of $2.2 trillion US. However, despite this increasing militarization, of course, we have not seen the world get any safer. We've actually seen it get a lot more dangerous. So then in 2022, as Emily had briefly mentioned, the International Peace Bureau, alongside the Olof Palme International Center in Sweden and the International Trade Union Confederation, or ITUC, came together to update the concept of common security and make it relevant for the 21st century, reflecting all of these issues that I've just mentioned. However, of course, it differs from the 1982 reports, primarily in that it is a civil society initiative. It is bottom up rather than top down. We also aim for it to be intersectional and cross-movement, not limited to peace activities, but also addressing environmental issues, addressing social issues and beyond. And this was done through input from a high-level commission and in-depth webinars that we conducted in the run-up to the publication of the report on a number of topics, from pandemics and cybersecurity to the importance of the role of women in peace and security operations, growing inequality in our societies, and of course, the threat of nuclear weapons, the existential threat that we're facing there. So now I go back to briefly mention who was involved. Here's the steering committee members of the three organizations that led the report. But beyond that, we had an advisory commission which covered a wide array of different activists, politicians, professors, experts in security and peace issues. I myself had the opportunity to serve as a youth advisor to the commission, but you can see here really a diverse collection of very interesting people across the geographical spectrum, across the age spectrum as well, and issue spectrum. So really quite a diverse group that we had there. And our work together produced the Common Security 2022 report for our shared future. And the report has a few sections. It is itself quite a short report, I think around 30 pages or so, and we'll post the link in the chat where you can find the reports. Currently, I think we have it in 6 languages, 5 or 6 languages, English, Spanish, German, Chinese, French, and Russian, I believe, are the languages currently available. And the core of the report, so we have the principles of common security, we have a section that goes through the context, but really the core is through the recommendations that came out of the report, divided into 4 categories: strengthening the global architecture for peace, new peace dividend, disarmament for development, revitalize nuclear arms control and disarmament, and new military technologies and outer space weapons. It is important to mention as well, of course, since this is a relatively short report, it is meant really as a starting point, not the final point. So this, for us, is the impetus for further action for common security, for further research, further reporting on common security that will come in the follow-up to this report. The principles, we have 6 main principles of common security that we created, and they are based on the 1982 reports, but again, updated to modern times. The first is that all people have the right to human security, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. The second is the importance of building trust between nations and peoples. The third is that there can be no common security without nuclear disarmament and strong limitations on conventional weapons. The fourth is that global and regional cooperation and multilateralism and rule of law are the crucial factors to tackle today's challenges. The fifth is the importance of dialogue, conflict prevention, and confidence-building measures instead of military and aggressive force actions. And the final is that we need better regulation to be extended to cover new military technologies. I don't know if anyone else has seen the report of the past couple days in the news of a quote-unquote satellite killer from Russia. That's, at least in Western media, is sort of at the forefront of news right now. How do we react to this? How do we react to future warfare in space? And this is, for us, very responding to that issue. We need to be able to create international regulations to know what is acceptable and not in outer space or these other new technological spheres. I won't go through in detail because I think I'm running just about out of time here. But we have then, under the main recommendation points, all these sub-points that you can find, again, in the reports that I think are quite interesting to look into. And now getting towards the end, one thing that's important, of course, is that civil society is actively involved in this, that this is not just a job of governments, but that we must push our governments to enact policies of common security, challenge how they talk about security, and replace it with other forms. We must be a watchdog, a motivating force, and a counterweight to political posturing. So there's plenty more work ahead of us, and I think we can go more into this future in this webinar, but there's still a lot to be done, and we hope to include all of you in our work for common security, that you will work with us to challenge the paradigm, change the paradigm on security, to create one that truly represents us all. And then I'll just end with this quote: "The threat of war and its consequences have not diminished over the years, but political will, people power, and a collective attitude can lead to change. There is still time to be innovative and ambitious in reframing security and reimagining our world." Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. And that was a very brief overview, but I hope it could be helpful for the people that are not that familiar with the concept of common security to start to understand it and to see it as an alternative, as you were saying. And our next speaker would be Joseph Gerson. He's a peace and disarmament activist, and he is president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, and he has served as vice president of IPB until 2022. Joseph is unwell, so I believe, Sean, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to speak again here. I think we will hear from Sean his brief presentation and speech that he wrote down for us because he couldn't make it today. So the topic here is why common security is essential now and why we are talking about it nowadays in the current international setting and situation. So, Sean, whenever you're ready, thanks.
Of course, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so you'll have to pretend that I am Joseph when I'm reading this. He's written it from his perspective here. But yeah, since he couldn't be with us given his illness, he did send a really comprehensive and well organized speech here. So I'm reading it on his behalf. And hopefully, yeah, I haven't had a chance to read through the whole thing out loud, so you'll excuse me if I make a couple small errors, but I think we'll be about 10 minutes for it here. So, last month, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists renewed the setting of its doomsday clock at 90 seconds to midnight, closest it has ever been to apocalyptic annihilation. Their reasoning included the intense great power and related geostrategic tensions, the dangers of nuclear war, the climate emergency, and the rise of authoritarianism and misinformation. UN General Secretary Guterres has warned that the world is becoming unhinged as geopolitical tensions rise and it seems incapable of coming together to respond to mounting challenges. Indeed, there are disturbing parallels to the forces that triggered the First and, by extension, the Second World Wars. Tensions between rising and declining powers, arms races with new technologies, complex alliance structures, intensifying nationalism, territorial competition, economic integration and intense competition, and wildcard actors. Yet, unlike the shots fired in Sarajevo in 1914, today an incident, accident, or miscalculation could trigger escalation to thermonuclear war. And to this, the intensifying great power military, technological, and economic competition serve as major barriers to the urgently needed cooperation among major powers to stanch the climate emergency and to reverse climate change. The Thucydides trap resulting from the clashing imperial ambitions of both the US and China, growing tensions in Korea, the Ukraine war, and Israel's genocide in Gaza with its potential for becoming a region-wide war could each serve as a trigger for escalation to nuclear war. At the very least, with their profound reverberations across the Asia-Pacific, Europe, and the global South, they mark the end of Pax Americana and the emergence of still largely undefined and fluid multipolar systems. These dynamic tectonic changes reflect competition for power that as we in the United States are unleashing domestic political forces' profound international ramifications. Think for a moment about the likely consequences of a Trump dictatorship on US-China relations, on the Asia-Pacific alliance structures, or on NATO and across Europe. Who knows where the current instability in nuclear-armed Pakistan will lead? And economic crises in China or India could lead to more aggressive military policies in order to distract public opinion. As enunciated in its national security strategy, while challenged by Russia in Europe and to a lesser degree in the global South, the United States' first strategic priority is maintaining its Indo-Pacific and thus its global dominance in the face of China's rising power and influence. China is named as the pacing threat that drives U.S. military planning and operations, and as it describes as the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it. The United States thus seeks to limit and manage China's rise to ensure continued U.S. dominance. Facing these U.S. threats, China's responses have been both defensive and aggressive, resulting in what is termed as a security dilemma. The so-called rules-based order that has long served as a cover for the expansion and maintenance of an imperial order. NATO's Kosovo War was fought in violation of the UN Charter, as were the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. And if we had any doubts about this, the US and wider Western world have thus far been almost totally unified in their support and complicity with Israel's genocidal war against the civilians of Gaza. For China and for much of the global South, and to a lesser degree Russia, the rules-bound order and its related institutions, from the United Nations to the International Monetary Fund, were written and imposed by the United States, by the former colonial powers, and by their allies, when the rest of the world was comparatively poor and weak. Those then marginalized nations didn't make the rules. Now their elites, and in the case of China, also its military, have greater power and influence. They are pushing back to change or at least modify the rules. Challenging the Pacific as an American lake, while also violating the law of the Sea Convention, China proclaims and seeks to militarily enforce its own 10-dot line, claiming sovereignty over more than 80% of the South China or West Philippine Sea. Sometimes this has led to armed clashes and confrontations with Vietnam, the Philippines, and other nations with claims to the strategic and mineral-rich waters. More immediately, Chinese area denial, naval, air, and missile forces now threaten the U.S. military control of the Western Pacific and the inner island chain. U.S. and Chinese ambitions for the military operations related to Taiwan, the self-governing island separated from China in 1895, and a U.S. protectorate since 1945, as well as for the mineral-rich and strategically South China or West Philippine Sea, over which 40% of the world trade traverses, are the tinderboxes where an accident or miscalculation could most easily trigger escalation to cataclysmic war. The military tensions, including nuclear tensions between South and North Korea, compounded by the recent developments of trilateral alliance and semi-alliance, such as U.S.-Japan Republic of Korea and China-Russia Democratic People's Republic of Korea, have grown to the point that South Korean peace movement leaders have sounded an early warning of the danger of war. And militarized territorial disputes, especially those between Japan and China in the East China Sea and between China and India in the Himalayas, carry the potential of exploding into hot wars. Adding another dimension to the geopolitical competition is the global South, especially the BRICS, the still divided network of nations inclusive of Russia and China and led by global South nations. The BRICS nations, initially comprised of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are emerging as a potentially powerful third force in global relations. It recently added Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates and Argentina, with other nations on the waiting list. Brief side note there that Argentina, of course, has since decided that it will not be a part of the BRICS. Limited by US-centered and dominated trade and other economic systems, the BRICS are determined to reform and make more equitable global financial governance. Beyond the global economy and reinforced by the semi-alliance structure of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS' pursuit of greater role in global governance of necessity would reduce the power and influence of the US and its allies. So what are the common security alternatives? There must, of course, be some way out here. Common security diplomacy, which Sean has just described, I have just described. The Palma Commission's 1982 Common Security Report recognized the existential threat to humanity at the height of the Cold War and the need to engage in diplomacy that identified the security fears that drove nations' preparations for nuclear war. It warned that there are no winners in a nuclear war and stressed that a doctrine of common security must replace the present expedient of deterrence through armaments. International peace must rest on a commitment to joint survival rather than the threat of mutual destruction. And it went on to announce its support for the goal of general and complete disarmament. The report and its common security paradigm served as a foundation for the negotiation of the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which functionally ended the Cold War 2 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall. That treaty prevented deployment in Europe of Russia's SS-20 and US Pershing II and nuclear-armed cruise missiles, which threatened not only the people of Europe, but human survival itself. Tragically, both Russia and the US have abandoned that treaty. As Sean described, as I described in 21 and 22, as great power confrontations again posed growing existential threats to human survival, and as the doomsday clock approached midnight, non-governmental organizations updated the call for common security diplomacy in order to prevent catastrophe and to provide a foundation for sustainable, if not perfect, peaceful international system. Drawing on the Palma report, it reiterated that global peace and security are created jointly, that when your counterpart is not secure, you will not be secure either, and pointed towards common security's potential to bring us back from the brink. Building from the broad strokes of the 2022 report, a number of us across the Asia-Pacific region and beyond are in the process of identifying concrete common security policy recommendations to diffuse the regional tensions that could trigger armed conflict and war. We have identified what we understand to be the most salient themes and immediate dangers that must be addressed, and we would certainly benefit from your pushback and suggestions. These are our themes: US and China, threat perceptions and threat management; twin existential threats, nuclear threats and the climate emergency; Taiwan, the world's most dangerous tinderbox; Korea and Northeast Asia; South China and the West Philippine Sea and ASEAN interests and security; South Asia, China and the Indian Ocean; alternatives to emerging alliance structures; the importance and potential of smaller states; and regional organizations' positive roles in the common security architecture. Among the recommendations we are considering are the following: taking advantage of the current détente between the US and China, China and India, to address the climate emergency as their first strategic priority and cooperate on an urgent basis to halt and reverse global warming. US reiteration of its commitment to the One China policy as outlined in the 3 US PRC joint communiques, a PRC declaration that it pursues reunification with Taiwan only by peaceful means, and development of a new paradigm following the delegitimization of the One China, Two Systems formula that opens the way for diplomacy that provides credible guarantees for Taiwanese political and cultural democracy within One China. Next is halting the escalating nuclear arms races, negotiating verifiable, no first use nuclear agreements, preventing of cyber hacking of command and control systems, and initiating multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations via the P5 and other multilateral fora. Multilateral agreements to deploy no nuclear weapons and missile defense systems, renewed US-China strategic and economic stability dialogue, a US declaration of the end of the Korean War, and negotiation of a peace treaty to formally end the Korean War, step-by-step negotiations leading to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the creation of a Northeast Asia nuclear weapons-free zone. And just a few more here. We have reduced and non-provocative military exercises related to Taiwan, Korea, the South China and West Philippines and East China Seas and the Indian Ocean, the completion of multilateral ASEAN-China negotiations for a South China-West Philippine Sea Code of Conduct agreement, the creation of an Asian common security system inclusive of the Indian Ocean and the South China-West Philippine Sea, being declared zones of peace with an end to provocative military exercises and activities in the regions, border disputes between India and Pakistan and India and China to be resolved on the basis of compromised common and human security, the extension of the Southeast Asian nuclear weapons-free zone to include Bangladesh and Nepal, and lastly, negotiations leading to regional common security arrangements similar to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, in place of the existing alliances. So many thank you to Joseph for that incredible speech that I had the privilege to read on his behalf.
Yes, that was really amazing from him, and we are really grateful that he took the time despite everything to write that down. So yeah, it's a pity that he couldn't be with us today, but I'm sure we will have other occasions where he can talk about the concept again. Yeah, now I would like to turn the floor to Anu Chenoy. She is a joint professor at the Jindal Global University in India, and a member of the IPB Common Security Working Group. She has been amazing in these years to help us with the working group around the concept of common security. And now she will briefly talk about moving from confrontation to common security. And Anu, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me. And we've already had a tour de force from Sean and Joseph on what common security is. And I mean, I would feel that anyone with logic and an interest in planetary survival would just take to it, but that is unfortunately not the case. So, what I've been asked to speak on is how to move from confrontation to common security, which is actually the hardest thing to do because it's easier for civil society, for people like us to actually envisage common security. But when you want to move away from the existing confrontation, um, it's hard because then you have to see, and that's what I try to see, what is the basis of this confrontation? And clearly, which comes out in from Joseph's paper especially, is, I mean, there are several bases for the confrontation, but the major base is for global confrontation is that the US and NATO really, and they keep enunciating it, that their aim is of maintaining some kind of global dominance. And the way they do this dominance is by intertwining themselves in any vulnerable region or country worldwide. So, for example, especially if there are material resources needed for maintaining this empire without boundaries. So you can see how they got intertwined in Ukraine and saw it as an opportunity, they're pretty intertwined with Taiwan, and they believe Taiwan security is their security, or they're intertwined with Israel, and and this intertwining is primarily through military means, as opposed to intertwining and making them a bridge between countries, ensuring human security, etc. So this primacy that and dominance that the US and NATO also want to maintain is also by removing competition, because they see competition as threat, as opposed to there can be a healthy competition and there can be an unhealthy competition. So it would seem to those of us who are outside this framework that this concept of security and competition is just another word for hegemony. It's a kind of a sleight of hand thing that who would think US hegemony is threatened? I mean, that combine all the other countries' military resources and the US is still ahead. So it's clearly to maintain hegemony. And this maintenance is also the threats are based on kind of different phobias of the other, whoever the other is. Russophobia, Sinophobia, Islamophobia, the phobia of terrorism, which can be anywhere, anytime, non-state actors, essentially. And they're all seen as these pacing threats, especially China, which the NATO doctrine or their strategic report concept of 2022 said, as the only competitor with the intent, capability to reshape the international order. Now, China doesn't say that. You know, India has an issue with China also. They both want to be hegemons in the South Asia region. But we don't see how China can reshape the international order. So what happens with these kind of threats is that what I see is there are four kinds of responses from state actors and from others, which lock in these confrontations. So there's one response from Russia, which initially appealed for inclusion into NATO or some kind of security architecture which it includes them into NATO. They didn't ask for a dismantling of NATO. They wanted to be part of it. But it was refused, so their response is an aggressive counter to this proxy war, as aggressive as the support from the US, maybe less militarized, but aggressive nonetheless. Similarly, would be the Chinese response, which is both defensive of increasing their militarization, and it verges on an aggression against Taiwan, because and one should see why this is happening now, because for years the US and China were almost allies till globalization. They were together in the Cold War against the USSR. But suddenly the US has decided that they do not want to talk to China on Taiwan, don't want a status quo. And therefore, this increase of possible confrontation. So then there is another response, which I believe is one way of moving out of this confrontation and this response, because you do need states. It's not moving from confrontation to common security is not going to happen with our reports. Though we are going to try and break that, or widen those cracks within hegemony and confrontation. But the response from the global south, and that is staying away from these confrontations. And therefore, they have developed strategies of moving away from confrontation. And though the global south has no coherent center, they are kind of anarchic. It's like 129 states, or maybe even 130 states, which meet erratically, usually once in 2 years, under this non-aligned movement, which had lacked luster after during the unipolar moment, because non-alignment started at a time when there was a confrontation between two blocks. And I do believe, and if your research might show you, that even though non-alignment was ignored during the Cold War, nonetheless, it did have a role to some extent of containing this confrontation, of not allowing it to spill over everywhere. And that was also a period when of the national liberation of many countries which were colonized into decolonized or independent status. So one needs to really look at it, because it is a choice made by so many 129 countries, or the majority, to stay away from confrontation, but also to carve out strategic autonomy for themselves, not to be part of either military alliance, neither, like currently, they do not want to be part of NATO. They've never asked for that. And nor do they want to be part of any Russian or Chinese military alliance. They do have strategic partnerships, but their preference is to leverage both for their interests. Now, within this is also the BRICS, and how do we see that, as Joseph's paper showed, and he showed a lot of hopes for BRICS. But BRICS also has Russia and China within it. Now, the thing about BRICS is it is not a security alliance. You can see any document ever since it was typed, all it says, it is a trading, and their interest is on trade and collective economic development, and to also be to link with the global south as much as they can. So BRICS is one of the fastest developing kind of multilateral alliance to date. It already has a functioning secretariat. It has developed a new development bank, and it continuously says that they are not against the West, they're not against NATO, but they're for multipolarity, where everyone would have, it is like what the UN says, that every state, whatever its size, should have an equal voice. And the international system, apart from common security, and common security doesn't talk about this, that it should actually be a more democratic system, however it can work out. So the UN should be democratized, the Security Council should reflect a kind of a global consensus, and so on. So therefore, the options available from moving away from confrontation are: one, countering hegemony by counter-hegemony, and that is what Russia and China do. And that is why the global south is not with them on every issue. So they don't want to be part of the defense-offense trap of threat escalation or defensive escalation, etc., which is happening between these two locked groups of great powers. So the second is by adapting neutrality. And actually, that would be similar in a sense of how the international physicians and other groups got the TPNW going. That is one of the major disarmament initiatives of the last few years, of getting it into force by having so many countries join the treaty for kind of nuclear weapons free and non-proliferation. So if we have something like that, which people sign into, of states which are not interested in this confrontation, which sign into common security and neutrality, that would help in challenging hegemony and hegemonic principles even more. And here I'm not just saying that there's the hegemons and the counter-hegemons. There are also regional hegemons. And India, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia are regional hegemons. And that's why you also have regional conflicts. So regionalization is another way of moving out of confrontation. And the other way, of course, is linking with civil society and civil society movements, which reports and movements led by IPB and Common Security do, which are intersectional. They link climate with social justice, and link social justice and climate with peace, link peace with development, link peace and development with women, peace and development, with youth, etc. So these are maybe some of the mechanics that maybe one can try to confront confrontation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you so much for as always, your amazing presentation. And I think it was also a brilliant bridge to what we would have loved to hear from Thor. Bjork was our last speaker, but I'm pretty sure he has some internet issues in Nepal. He is joining the World Social Forum in person, and I think he cannot connect at the end today, but his part was exactly about all these connections that we are seeing, even always more and more around these issues. It's not that we can just talk about one topic without talking about the other one, and his focus is more around the environmental movement and social movement, and how common security is also connected to climate justice and social justice. And for me, also personally, it's getting every time more clear that we need to have this comprehensive and holistic approach to these issues. And maybe just for our participants, something that I would like to share that's connected to this links, and how also like the military and climate change are connected, and we need to also stress this always more and more. I'm just posting in the chat also a link to a report it's the latest report from last year from other organizations that are partnered with IPB, and it's about the crossfire, exactly how climate crossfire, how NATO's military spending targets contribute to climate, also breakdown. And just in order to cover a little bit also that if you're interested, but you will also hear more from us if you will, if you want and you follow our work. We will have for sure in the future, not that long from now, other events that are going to target exactly this connection also with climate and social justice and security and disarmament. So if you are interested in this part of the conversation, I hope you can have another chance to talk with us. Thanks. Sean also is posting another report also from 2022. We are just sharing all the resources that we think can be useful for you. And maybe we can now open the floor if there are questions or comments. Also, regarding what Anu was saying at the end of her presentation, around also the role of civil society in this conversation, because what I would like to ask our presenters, maybe as a starting point, in the meantime, I hope the participants can also have the time to think maybe about other questions or comments. But what I would like to ask you is how you see the role, concrete role of civil society, and if you have other ideas on inputs, how we can foster also the paradigm of common security, and how we can advertise that maybe more.
I can maybe start us off there. For me, sort of the most important thing any individual even can do is simply just challenging the current understanding of security. When politicians, when decision makers, when even academics are talking about security, most of the time it is in this very limited sense of security as the security of the state, military security, and not that of people within society. I'm from the U.S., so I of course have sort of that experience in the back of my head, where we are by far the largest spender on military across the globe. And meanwhile, there is no guarantee even for health insurance for people in the U.S. society, and there's a terribly high rate of poverty. Inequalities within society, educational levels, public school education in the U.S. is deteriorating drastically. We have problems with small arms and light weapons, and just 2 days ago, I think there was another mass shooting, and none of this is mentioned in any way, shape, or form when the U.S. government talks about security and what makes us safe. They are talking about the threats from Russia, from China, from Iran, from North Korea, but what have these governments done to the U.S. that's worse than what we're doing to ourselves? Which is, that people within society do not feel safe, do not feel that their basic needs are met. And I think this goes very much into the overlap that if Tord had been with us, that he would bring in as well. Even quote unquote middle class across much of the world is finding their purchasing power decreasing, their ability to make ends meet with salaries decreasing, while military spending continues to rise, and we're not seeing those effects of security in our society. So we need to, as civil society, as individuals in societies, in our conversations with friends, with family, with others, really challenge them as well. Well, what truly makes you feel safe? What is it that can make us, feel safer within our societies? And I'll guarantee you, most everyone will say it is not the military. Maybe they still see a role for the military, but by and large, we are concerned with what we experience on a daily basis within our societies. And so I think that's, can be quite impactful also just for shifting this paradigm, for changing the way we think of quote unquote security or quote unquote defense, and finding alternatives. And then, of course, what we're doing at IPB in terms of civil society is bringing groups together to have these conversations about what makes us safe, and also what are the geopolitical threats in our parts of the world. Where do we have these security concerns of other nations, and how can we truly resolve those rather than making it worse? I think, no one wants an arms race, but that is what we get when we continue military spending, when we continue to take unilateral or action only with our allies to bolster our own defenses. What happens as a result is our adversaries feel the need to do the same because they feel threatened by our own countries, and it's a vicious cycle. So I think there as well, having a coalition, an international coalition that's addressing these, having civil society discussions between people from quote unquote adversary countries, to be able to speak to one another, and also realize necessarily what our states are doing is not what we want them to do in our societies. I think that cross-cultural international discussions are also very important when we talk about this. We also continue to need mass demonstrations in the streets, people protesting for change, for a change of ways. Maybe I'll leave it there for now, and then I'm sure there's much more I can say, but that's maybe a good starting point.
It's definitely is. Thank you so much, Sean. And Anu, do you want to add anything?
I think, there is more awareness and some thinking about things like human security and common security currently than there was earlier, because of social media and the kind of visual images they see of, especially, I'm talking from the view of the South, the images they see of Palestine. And on the one hand, there's anger, but there's also some rethinking going on about war, about hegemony, about hypocrisy, about rules-based order. So on the one hand, there is a fear of a breakdown of what everyone is used to in terms of a status quo. But on the other hand, there is also some thinking, and the message from civil society, though civil society is being oppressed in a lot of the global souths. And a lot of the global south is now like they're elected autocrats. And democratic spaces are shrinking. But social media has provided an opportunity where one tends to see more than before debates and these kind of concepts of common security, human security, that we need to move away from war, the idea of climate concerns all the young people, the environment. But what has also happened is it's like a lot of dots in the sky, which people are seeing. So it needs people like us to make the connections. That is not so clear anymore. The connections, the dots are there. You can see these visual images. But I think that's where our come in and are important, and our analysis, where we show the connections, that there is a connection between, there is a possibility of negotiation as opposed to war, that there is a possibility of confidence that there is something like you know, the other needs to be, there should be a coexistence within societies, between states. So that is one sign of, a shred of hope, as it were. That's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Anu. It's really wonderful what you were saying. I have this picture now in my mind. I think I will keep it for a while, that we are the one that need to do the connections, and I think it's really, really true. And yeah, thanks for this wonderful image there. Yeah, maybe before we are running a bit late, but I think it's okay. And I really appreciate everyone that is still on the call. And I would like to open the floor if there are any questions. And you can just raise your hand or give me a sign if you want to have the floor. And okay. I don't think I see anybody. Let me know if I'm missing anything. If not, I think we can close today's event. And again,
I just want to give one
yeah,
example.
please, yes.
That when this whole climate movement began, many of us, and I think including Sean and Nick from TNI, we kept saying, we need to link climate with peace and security. But a lot of the green parties and a lot of the Greens, they were fixated on climate, but on security they had the same attitude, that we have to ensure our security or Europe's security. And we kept saying, no, it's interlinked, And now finally there are these reports coming out, especially linked by TNI, etc., and it's catching on worldwide. But otherwise, similarly on many of the trade unions, even in India, for example, when we had this movement against religious radicalism, they said, no, everyone is our member. We have all communities, so we can't address that. But now they realize that that is also part of their role. So similarly, I think if we can get this message of how we intersect, as opposed to just using the word, I think we'll get somewhere. Thank you. Sorry for intervening again.
No, that's completely true. And it's something also that IPB is trying to do really active lately. We are willing to make this connection also among the different movements. And we as peace movement, we know we need to talk more also with the, I don't know, in this case, the environmental movement. And I think that there has been some developments there, and I'm pretty sure these connections, as you were saying, will be getting more and more also clear for the movements themselves, but also for civil society in general, and also for people. And I think also what your comment about the graphics and social media is something that it's really powerful there, and I think we can use it as a tool to simply share the informations, because most of the time people are just not aware of the facts. And I think it's good that we can use these tools. And I don't know, just example today with Zoom and all these kind of technologies, the fact that we can talk even though we are all in different parts of the world is also something we can use on our favor, for sure. And I see a hand, Barku. Sorry if I am not saying the name correctly. You're muted.
It's fine. I'm Burcu Schneider. I'm a peace worker. Just I'm trying to understand this security word. Is it like it's connected with the fear also? Like we are afraid of now what's going on in the world. It's going deeper and deeper and deeper every day. Somehow it's much more constructive, I think, to use the peace while we are building a kind of architecture for the future steps. Now it became a huge discussion in the world that security will really save our nature and everything. There is a kind of fear inside of such a word which may hinder our works. So I can imagine to rethink again while we are using this concept and before we implement our ideas. Like it's somehow different to use more peace than security. And about the social movement, green movements, like we saw this. We also witnessed when the wars became like over the last 2 years, especially after the corona, the militarization went wild, and mostly the Green Party, also this social movements like green movements, they supported also more militarization. There is a in between militarization and climate or nature protection is a huge understanding problem, as we know that militarization doesn't support the environmental issues. But now we start to work also during the transformation process how militaries can take responsibilities for the climate change, which is also a big step and huge step. It's very valuable to work accordingly with militaries to think environmental peace building and environmental issues also. So it's a kind of, I think, such kind of gaps, and according to our attitudes and behaviors, which makes contradictions. So it is not easy to find a kind of intersectional solutions, but there is a hope still in the society. What I observe also in the micro level, peace building, individual level, movements can change our neighborhoods and our cities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this beautiful message. I think it's the perfect conclusion for this event, like with this hope. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Sean, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that, Burcu. I think those were great remarks, and I think a couple things maybe to clarify from my end. First, in terms of the term security, yeah, I personally I think this term is very toxic because of how much it's been misused. Common security, I think the reason we on one hand decided to go with this term is historical because of its history since the 1980s and successful role. And the other reason, maybe because it is a term that people are familiar with, and those who aren't peace activists can still hear this term and think, okay, it's about my safety, my security, but thinking of it now, hopefully in a new way, but still leaving some level of familiarity. And then one more interesting thing when it comes to, we use common security in our work, but for those, I don't know who here may have had the chance to read the UN policy brief number 9 from last year from Antonio Guterres, A New Agenda for Peace. There they use the term collective security to basically mean the same thing that we mean when we say common security. And there again, it's another term, but the same kind of principles apply, that security is only really there when we have it all together. And that no one state or one actor can have security at the expense of the others. But so that's kind of where we're coming from. Collective or common security, I think, is an attempt to bridge some of the gaps while also challenging security as it's defined now. Peace is still a part of that, but I also think peace is beyond common security. We often say common security or collective security is a first step towards peace, but it is not the entire picture of peace. It's meant really on this intergovernmental relational level. But I think much more work needs to be done even beyond common security for really true peace in the future, just peace in the future for everyone. This is something that has to be done through all levels of society. And again, I think we know peace is not just the absence of war, but also the presence of justice. And so there's more components to it. Common security does not ensure that every state will be democratic and fair and just for every person, but it is addressing first and foremost the largest existential crises that we face, and finding ways to de-escalate, finding ways for states to relate to each other to pursue more peace. But it itself is not the entire picture of peace. And then one other thing I picked up from what you were saying, Burcu, that I found very interesting is this fear and this doubt that a lot of people feel within societies. And there, I think what common security has most to offer is trust building, confidence building measures, so that while we might still have some doubt, there's also verifiable ways to prove that states are working together for peace, that they can build trust between the states to eliminate at least some of those doubts and causes of the fear, and replace them with causes for trust and verifiable mechanisms to see that that trust remains in place. So I think those are just a couple follow-up points I took from listening to you speak, Burcu. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Sean. I just want to give, I don't know, Anu, if you have any final remarks or anything, or the other participants, final chance. If not, again, thank you so much for being with us today. It was a real pleasure to see you all and meet you all. And I'm just stopping here the live streaming and the recording, and just for